Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We are so glad that you're here. And on behalf of O2 Consulting Group and Park Street Partners, we'd like to thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon. And before I introduce our speakers, I'd just like to share a couple of housekeeping rules for today. Q&A will be done at the end of the session. And if you have any questions, please post them in the chat section that sits right at the top of the bar here on this Teams platform. I also wanted to just let you know that there will be two surveys. They're both one question that are going to pop up before each speaker. And you'll have about 10 seconds to answer those. So just be on the lookout. And then what I'd like to do now is to just share our agenda with you so you'll know what you're in for. So future-proofing your organization, integrating leadership succession into strategic planning. So we will be covering why strategic planning is essential, the core elements of strategic planning, why succession planning is needed for continued growth, and share with you a little bit more about how O2 Consulting and Park Street can help facilitate solving these challenges. And as I've mentioned, we will do a Q&A at the end of the session. So with those few pieces of information out of the way, I would like now to introduce you to our speakers. Bonnie Ortiz formed O2 Consulting Group, which is a premier professional services firm, in January of 2018, after spending almost a decade as the Chief Operating Officer for the Partnership Federal Credit Union. She is a recognized expert in strategy formulation, process improvement, and process management. And Bonnie and her team provide their clients with a comprehensive operational toolkit, aligning people and processes and systems that match up with corporate goals. The organization grew in clients and staff, and in 2023, they were purchased by PAHO and WHO, Federal Credit Union, and began the transitional project to being a CUSO, a credit union service organization. And today, Bonnie and her team of expert consultants provide strategic planning, operational excellence, project management, and fractional executive services to credit unions nationwide. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Kirk Kordeleski, who has over 40 years of experience in the credit union industry. He's accumulated a wealth of insights and knowledge while spending 15 years at Bethpage Federal Credit Union as the CEO, and he served as the EVP of Strategy and IT prior to that. In addition, Kirk worked at Bank Fund Staff, FCU, as a vice president. And beyond the traditional credit union roles, Kirk has made significant strides in the fintech space. In addition to co-founding multiple firms specializing in credit union strategy and digital transformation, he holds advisory and board positions with several fintech startups. And in his current role at Park Street Partners, Kirk integrates his experience with an innovative approach to credit union strategy and executive benefits consulting. He possesses an adept understanding of credit union leadership teams and their complex needs, which enables him to create SERPs that blend innovation with customization. And now we will do our first poll. So let me pop this up on the screen. Okay, so we're going to, here we go. We're going to reopen that poll. And you should see one question. Does your credit union have a robust strategic plan? And you're just going to answer yes or no. We'll give you about 10 seconds to get those responses in there. Okay, got a few answers, and we're going to close that poll and be done with that. All right. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Bonnie to the platform. And Bonnie, it's all yours, so take it away.
Thank you, Mary, very much. And thanks for joining the webinar today, folks. I'm looking at the question that Mary has posed, and I'm realizing that the most important word in that question is robust. You know, for most of us, we can say that we've checked the box to have a strategic plan, and that strategic plan, may be just a way for us to ensure that the NCUA or any other auditor that is looking for a roadmap can find one. But the question is it really your vision? Have you really looked at what is going to happen to your organization in the future? Have you looked at how what your outcome needs to be is going to follow through with your goals, your objectives, and then, of course, the resources that you are going to need in order to be able to achieve that vision? And we talk about people, processes, and systems because at O2 Consulting Group, we have a strong desire to ensure that while you look and think and work towards growth, that you are also operating from a structure that is stable and that not only will allow your credit union to succeed, but to thrive. And so we're going to talk for a few minutes about each one of those things. Mary, if you want to go to the next slide on people, I'll be happy to start there with what is our most important asset. So, people, especially in credit unions these days, are somewhat difficult to find, to identify, to hire, and to retain. And again, that R word, the most robust strategic plan is accompanied by people that you can retain, that you develop over time. So identifying your key leadership and making sure that those key leaders know what their responsibilities and accountabilities are, that have that critical thinking about them, that can really take that strategic plan and ensure that it is executed throughout the credit union. Now, when I was a COO, I used to think about my CEO's responsibility was to create that wonderful vision. Where are we going? What are we going to do? What are we excited about? And my role as the executor was to ensure that that vision came alive. And I couldn't have done that without the right people. So identifying that key leadership, making sure that the leadership roles were fully staffed. And I was proud during that time to say that we did not lose one strategic person. But, as you continue to grow and you go through mergers, acquisitions, and reorganizations, it becomes even more important for you to create that succession plan, which Kirk will be talking about in a little bit. But to ensure that your strategic plan not only identifies who your key people are and how you are going to find them and develop them, but also how are you going to get them ready for the next all important position. And there's nothing wrong with going outside, looking externally for talent, but anytime that you can provide that talent from within is something that I believe that you are doing for your people and for yourselves. And then, of course, rewarding those leaders is all incredibly important. We do so much project management at O2 Consulting Group, and those projects are often complex. They take a lot of time and energy. And to be honest with you, celebration is sometimes lost. So we make sure that at the end of every project that we celebrate, we look at lessons learned, and we reward those leaders that have done those projects that have aligned to those goals. So, coming out of that strategic planning process, your people should be thinking about their departments, what they're responsible for, what projects they are going to get accomplished in order to be able to align with their goals and their strategies. And of course, lastly, we're talking about and have been talking about providing opportunities for career growth. Often I think of projects as a really valuable way to do that, especially in small and mid-sized credit unions where project management offices are not typically found. Allowing your people in various departments to understand how efficient and effective they can be in both supporting their day-to-day work as well as leading projects is critically important. Next slide, Mary. And so now we, of course, have to worry about processes. And I don't want to talk about process for just having process sake. You know, it's all about efficiency. It's all about effectiveness, driving towards operational excellence. Way back in the day, it used to be called total quality management, and then it was called continuous process improvement, but it's never lost its emphasis. It's still the same thing. It's about driving to high performance, making sure that you've established key performance indicators at the very start inside of that project plan, inside of that strategic plan, making sure that when you walk away from your strategic planning conference, that you know what you're going to measure, because what gets measured gets done. And then implementing best practices, being vulnerable, knowing that you might not know it all, looking outside of yourselves, looking not only to other credit unions who may do things in a best practice fashion that you would like to emulate, but also looking at the outside world, looking at fintechs, for flexibility, looking at other partners who have established good, sound programs that you can benefit from. And then conducting process audits. I just spoke about this at the Makuma conference a week or so ago, and it's very important for everyone to know just how critical it is to perform those audits. They feel like a big nuisance, right? They feel like they're overwhelming and overburdening, but in reality, they give you an opportunity, if you are really managing them effectively, to look at what you could be doing better and then to prioritize those things that are going to have the most impact in your organization, and again, drive back to that strategic plan. Not only are you going to know that you're compliant with all of your regulatory requirements, but you're going to be able to drive to better efficiencies, effectiveness, and again, organizational excellence. Next slide, Mary. And of course, we wouldn't be sitting here today and be wise in this webinar if we didn't talk about innovation and automation. And so every strategic planning conference should have a component part about what can you automate. And that's not to lose people. It's not to get rid of people. I've heard so many presentations recently on artificial intelligence. And while everybody, I think, is a little scared of it, they also have to be amazed and astounded at what it can do. So knowing that you have accurate data, knowing that it's accessible to you generally from a single source, if that is possible within your credit union, is really critical to forming that digital roadmap. Making sure that as you look at the services and the channels that you serve your members through, that you've considered where those members want to be served. I think in today's day and age, you're still seeing brick and mortar. Of course, there are some folks who want to come into a branch, many who don't ever want to come into a branch, and some are sort of betwixt and between because they run into trouble. They need some research, they need some help and guidance, and that's what we're there for. But making sure that we have a transformation roadmap in place to take us from where we are today to where we may want to be in the next year, the following year, and the year after that. And then, of course, cybersecurity, the all concerning kind of cloud around us that says, are we at any moment in time going to be vulnerable? And that goes back to your processes, making sure that your information technology structure is robust enough, but is certainly created for you and your size credit union, and to make certain that that cybersecurity system is watched over, that you have good monitoring practices in place, and that you can scale that for yourselves. So many small and middle-sized credit unions these days are outsourcing to managed services firms, and that works very beautifully for a lot of organizations, but you always have to remember within your strategic planning process that as the credit union, you are still responsible for those third and fourth and even fifth party vendors that you're managing. And so when you start thinking about your strategic plan, think about it in a balance, like a seesaw. There's growth on one side, and there's operational strength, power, and stability on the other. And if you adjust your agenda so that you can ensure that you have considered the growth and the vision that you see as your ultimate outcome in that 2, 3, or even 5-year plan, and then stepping back and determining where people, where processes, and where systems are going to fit into that will give you an opportunity to build a workbook. Mary mentioned the O2 toolkit, and so that toolkit at that juncture would contain all of that information. You would walk away with not only the vision in broad, bold, and neon lights, but you would also see your goals, your strategies, and then be able to go back home and work with your staff, all of them, to engage them around the tactics so that they know how they fit in to that structure and how they then become a part of that strategic planning process. Next slide, Mary.
Oops. I think that's it, Bonnie.
I do too. I think we're at the end.
I
Thank
think
you.
we are too. Yes, thank you. So now we're going to launch that second poll that I mentioned to you. And this one is around if your strategic plan includes succession planning. So if you would all take a few minutes to just put something in that one for us. All right. I think we've got the responses we were hoping to get. Okay. Well, now I'm going to turn this over to Kirk and let me get to the next slide, Kirk, for you. So there you go, sir. It's all yours.
Mary, thank you so much, and welcome everyone to our webinar today. We do indeed appreciate your time, and including those folks on the East Coast where the day is running towards its end. What I loved about Bonnie's presentation and what O2 does in general is this idea of the complexity of the current banking model, specifically the current credit union model that we are dealing with, that we're operating in, that we're serving members in today. And I think her presentation did just such a marvelous job in 3-4 slides of showing the complexity that is necessary to balance and to achieve, and the success that's necessary to achieve to be able to perform for our members and create member value. And I want to take that conversation and connect strategy with compensation philosophy and ultimately with succession planning. Because as Bonnie said, the most important asset of any organization, specifically and particularly, I would argue, credit unions, is its leader and its leadership team. Those assets create the strategy, evolve the model, create the execution and the operational quality that is necessary to serve members and create member value. So I hope that by the end of this, I've been able to connect those dots in a way that you can see the value of succession planning to the continuation of the strategy. And if I don't leave you with anything else, I hope to leave you with this point, that if you think about succession planning as the continuation of your strategy, culture, and member value, then I think you can see the importance of succession planning as it relates to our organizations. I will take the point of that being a leader in an organization, in a credit union, is its most important asset. And I'll highlight that by saying leading a credit union is the toughest job in banking. I feel passionate about this point. Running a credit union entails this balance between running a business and running a collaborative member-owned organization. The latter part of that means running a company on the smallest margin, highest dividend rates, lowest loan rates, lowest fees, and being able to do that often without access to capital requires a special balance to be able to have the right strategy to continue to grow and to perform and execute. So leadership is particularly acute in credit unions. But yet we're facing a time where extraordinary leadership turnover is occurring. This demand for talent, in my 45 years in this industry, I've never seen anything quite like these multiple pressures that are happening on the leaders to lead and be successful, but also in pushing or creating an environment where leaders are leaving the organization. First and foremost is my age group retiring, right? The baby boomers retiring in mass numbers. Oops, go back. There we go. Thank you. But it's also the asset growth of credit unions, new C team members coming on board, the complexity of the business, which requires specialization of talent. All of that is absorbing talent that is within credit unions and from coming from the outside. So we're seeing this immense loss of leadership talent in retirements and an exponential increase in the requirements of new CT members simultaneously. And that creates an amazing pressure on compensation and executive benefits in order to bring the right talent in. But we'll touch on that in a moment. I think all of us have experienced this up and down growth period over the last 5 years. 2021 saw substantial growth. 22, kind of a measured growth as interest rates started going up. 23, a softening of ROA. 24, for 6 months, also a softening, so slowing growth. So it's been quite a pendulum up and down. But as we look back over that 5 years, most credit unions are 30 to 40% bigger than they were in 2020. And with that asset growth, two things occur. Complexity happens, new products, new services, new markets. New talent is necessary to serve that environment, and compensation models change. In addition, we're also seeing at the simultaneous time, and it's the reason why I refer to this as the fifth generation, is a change in the retail model as we become more digital, and we're using data extensively for business intelligence, for making lending decisions, for using AI in marketing and operations to slim down, to make it easier to operate, to create more scale. That takes a different level of talent and skills, which also is creating demand for talent. So as you look at this environment, I think we're in a new generation. I would call it the fifth generation of credit unions that requires new skills and talent, which I'll call the fifth generation of leadership for credit unions, because of these 5 boxes that you see in front of you, creating a different world and a significant demand for talent. Next slide, please. You think about Jim Collins's book now that's been out probably for 20 years that talked about what talent really means to strategic performance, financial performance, and in our case, member value creation. In his book, he looked at different types of leaders. It was actually called fifth generation leadership in his book as well. But it created this 7X performance. If you have great leadership, and you have the ability then to strategize, visualize a future, create a member value equation, a niche for your model, and execute on that model, you're a special company. And that special company grows, outperforms, and in our case, serves our members far better than its competitors in the retail banking space. Next slide, please. But as I said, and this is to emphasize this challenge that we have, while leadership has become much more important to our performance in serving our members and creating member value, we're losing the experience within our industry as we retire. The height of this retirement was last year, 23 and 24, when baby boomers were at their peak. But look at it for the next all the way through 2030 anyway, we have significant retirements. And I imagine each of you follow the same press that I do, Credit Union Times, CU Today, all of the CU broadcasts, whatever those publications and channels, marketing channels might be. And there is an announcement every week about significant retirements within the industry. And you only hear really about the CEOs. But if you look at the job openings, you can see the extensiveness of the C-level talent that's being acquired. So all of this is the data behind this stress on the system. And now we'll start talking about why succession planning has to matter so much in order to keep your talent, because that talent is being searched for by other credit unions in your marketplace. Next slide, please. Thinking about leadership and keeping leaders, in essence, when you create a succession plan, how to ensure that the people that are on your team are going to stay with your organization, hopefully to the time that they retire, in order to sustain the organization, sustain the strategy, and sustain the culture and the brand of the organization. So when you look at the baby boomers and the expanded teams required that we just talked about, then compensation really matters. So if you accept that there is a large demand for talent and all of these changes are occurring, then you can understand the data starting to show that salaries have grown substantially. Annual incentives, that's base salaries, have grown substantially. Annual incentives have grown substantially. And the importance of supplemental executive retirement plans, which PARC Strategy specializes in, it becomes crucial to the retention of that talent. So looking at the marketplace, understanding where compensation is, understanding probably 2 years before an executive retires what the market conditions are for compensation becomes vitally important. So you aren't shocked by the current cost of an executive because that demand has created it, and you're aware of what the market, what you'll need to recruit or retain the top talent today. If you look at large credit unions over $1 billion, their compensation model has become even more complex. And I'll show you that in a moment. As it now is base salary, annual incentive, long-term incentive, that is an incentive that's tied to the strategic goals of the company, and a retirement plan or a SERP. So succession planning then needs to have this data in compensation. So you set up a succession plan that rewards people, puts on golden handcuffs for them to stay within the company. So you keep your leadership in place. But in order to do that, you need to understand the compensation landscape in a deep way. Next slide, please. And so these are the 4 pillars of compensation that we see going across the marketplace. 3 of them, base salary, annual incentives, and SERPs, you see at almost every category or every asset size of credit unions. Long-term incentives are more and more prominent at over $1 billion and almost always in place at over $3 billion in assets. This model is essential because without stock options, there isn't a way to provide the incentives for executives to stay at an organization, that's a SERP, or to compensate them for taking risks and delivering on the strategy and growing in a difficult market, that's the annual incentives and long-term incentives, and then to recruit and retain talent, that's the base salary. So all of those have to fit into a compensation philosophy that is executed on a continuous basis and stays at the market conditions, or you won't be able to compete for talent. And talent is what creates value for members. Next slide, please. So if you look at a couple touch points, a couple data points for how much salaries have increased, you'll see it on the next 2 slides. In 2022, a year and a half ago, Q's compensation study, backed up by NAFQ and backed up by others, saw a double-digit 14.9% increase for CEO salaries, base and annual incentive. And even in 23, when things softened, it was an 8.5% increase. And that really doesn't tell the whole story. If you go to the next slide, if you're a top performing credit union, that's the blue bars that you see, you'll see that you'll notice that how much the salaries have increased for the high performing credit unions, because those executives are fewer and fewer in the marketplace. The ones that are performing have often gotten to retirement age. And so the demand for those that are really performing at a high level are at double digits across the asset board. And so this is important data to understand when you're thinking about how to create a succession plan, how to reward your leaders for performance within your strategy, and how to retain them in your future. Next slide, please. So putting this together, as you look at a model to understand the current environment, the current compensation environment, and what you need to do to acquire or retain leadership, we would suggest you look at these 4 points. Extraordinary leaders create extraordinary organizations. It's not only Jim Collins, but we know this in the companies that we've worked for and the organizations that we've seen. I'm sure this is true of Bonnie. I know that in my work in strategy and performance, I have seen credit unions consistently double their size every 5 or 6 years. I've seen organizations outperform their market by 2x and 3x in similar credit unions. And that is because they have a strategy, they execute on that strategy, and they have the leaders that believe and care in their organization, are passionate about collaboration and cooperation and credit union values, as well as understanding of how to run a retail banking business. And that complexity, those pieces of that puzzle, that's when you have real talent, and thinking about how you're going to retain that talent becomes important. And I'll emphasize that the retention of that talent is often around that 4th pillar that we talked about in the foundation for compensation, which is SERPs. Without stock options in our industry, the way you create value is create a supplemental executive retirement plan that entices the executive to stay until their retirement date within your organization so you can count on them in your succession plan. So that talent investment that I just described then creates the environment that someone feels comfortable within the organization, that they know that they're taken care of by that company, and that drives strategy and then market share and long-term growth. So without this type of investment in leadership and in your succession plan, you can't keep those leaders within your company. Great leaders are going to find their way to a place that satisfies their will and their interest in growing the company and where they're treated fairly. It's the way we all want to be, and how we all look at our lives is if we're treated fairly and if we have the ability to stay in an organization and devote ourselves to it, and we know that we're taken care of, then our mind is open to how we can perform and stay and grow that company to its utmost abilities. The last point that I'll make is that when you think about where your talent comes from today, be open-minded, understanding that talent now is coming from commercial and community banks, from fintechs, from data companies, from expertise in AI, in all sorts of manners. We're drawing talent in. And so thinking about how that compensation works and then thinking about how to keep them becomes even more complicated because they're used to long-term incentives and they're used to stock options or supplemental executive retirement programs. Next slide, please. Last slide. You'll get a copy of this deck, and we'll share this with you. And so I won't go into the detail of all of this, but I wanted to point out that when I was at Bethpage, the complexity of what we looked at in succession planning, because of the importance that we put on it. It was a semi-annual event that revolved around, started with looking at how a CT member and their business line, or a VP and their business line, performed to their business plan and how they had met the business and strategic goals of the company. We often use balanced scorecards to help that happen, but it was an assessment that happened on a semi-annual basis with feedback specifically set to this concept of, are you evolving to the next position within the company? Are you evolving with the company as it grows? And are you meeting your goals? We had each executive present their business plan to the executive team, to the senior team, going down to the VP level. We had each VP and on up, rate, identify how well that individual had fit into the team and performed. That is the fourth box down, the leadership assessment. We had a formal process in place that we based on the Harvard Business Review, A, B, and C's, and we ranked everyone publicly on A, B's, and C's. You may think that that is a bit severe, but we did it in a way that was supportive. We provided education and learning and training so people could move. Anyone that was rated in total by the executive team as an A were given additional responsibilities. Bs were given additional education and training and opportunity to grow to an A. We did not look at it as a bell curve. We looked at 30% of the leadership should be in an A, 50% should be in B, and 20% or thereabouts potentially in C. And the C level people, we gave a process to that they would grow into a B. So we gave them training, we provided them resources. If they did not meet the requirements, they left the company after that year. The important thing about this is that if you're going to have a succession plan that's going to work, it has to be constantly monitored and analyzed. We also asked people a tough question, is that they needed to inform us 2 years before their retirement so that we could plan for it. That could be uncomfortable, but it is essential for the company. Organizations that have prolonged success have a succession plan in place that works. Part of that working is understanding where people are in their careers. Think of it as a relay race. Relay races are won and lost every Olympics on how the handoff goes from the baton from one runner to the next. The fastest group, if they drop the baton, will lose the race. That's very analogous to this environment. So you have to be vigorous and rigorous about how this model goes. We then also highly prioritized learning and training. We required people to go outside of credit union conferences and learning into executive education once every 2 years. But whatever the process is, the idea behind this is formalization and then reporting it to the board. The board should understand you can do this in any way that you're comfortable with as a CEO and how much you identify to the board. But there should be an annual process where you show that there is talent behind each leader that can be fulfilled within the organization, or that there is an opening that you need to fill. That provides the organization with the understanding of how it will evolve into the future, and provides a safety net for everyone to understand that the team understands its challenges and builds into the future. Lastly, and I think many of you know that the NCUA is starting to ask for documented succession plans. We'll see if that gets finally approved by the NCUA, but that looks to be evident. And in that case, then something like this will probably be required by most organizations. And with that, Mary, I think I'm down to my last slide.
Yes, sir. Let me get back over here so we can take that down. So we're going to sort of wrap up this, and I'd like Bonnie, you to start and to talk about why the credit unions that are on this call should consider using O2 Consulting Group for strategic planning, any of the other items that you've mentioned.
Thank you so much, Mary. And you know how much I love to talk about the organization that I'm so passionate about and the work that we do. As Mary said earlier in this webinar, we were formed in 2017 at the very beginning of 2018 as a woman-owned business. My vision at the time, and I think one of the reasons that I like strategic planning so much and I love to talk about it and help organizations with it, is because I do it myself. I look at it from the perspective that if I can't provide a vision to this group of great consultants that I have, then they are not going to have a roadmap to be able to move towards with their clients. Our difference, therefore, is in our people. And as Kirk said so eloquently so many times about the greatest asset that you can have, we started out to ensure that we had very seasoned specialists in the credit union world. They know the industry, they know the challenges, they understand what you are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and they stay abreast of everything at the forefront of emerging trends. So we ensure that they get the training and the involvement in seminars and webinars and conferences to ensure that they're networking on a regular basis to be able to bring the right tools to you, the right recommendations to you as you're looking at either strategic planning or process improvement, optimization of your processes. One of the other things that I wanted to point out is that we're not a shop that just talks about what you do. We don't come in, kind of do a gap analysis and hand you a report that says, here you go, this is what you're supposed to be doing. We really roll our sleeves up and we leave the organization with not only the what, but the how and the all important why. It used to be in years past that you never asked why. You just did. You just did what you were told to do. It's not the case any longer. And why drives the value? And so we want to be of value to every client that we approach, every client that approaches us. And we want to leave them with an understanding that they were better off after the initiative that they engaged us in than before. And so, true to what I said about strategic planning, whether we are helping you to build a workbook and a toolkit that aligns your strategies to your goals and tactics and those projects that will help you to grow into the next 1, 2, and 3 years and beyond, or whether you're looking at a very specific process improvement project or any other recovery project that you might undertake, we want to make sure that we have left you with a blueprint so that you can develop your staff alongside of our staff. So we become a partner to you, we become an adjunct of your organization, and we develop the staff you assign to us for just that purpose. So that blueprint that we leave you with can not only be used for you to then sustain and stand on your own, but it can be used to duplicate other project approaches and other strategies in the future. And I think one of the other important things that Kirk said I want to kind of leave you with as it relates to strategic planning. When you go into a strategic planning exercise, the responsibility you have is to hold one another accountable for the conversations that you're having, for the engagement that you give during that session, and for ensuring that what you're going to build, you're all going to commit to. The what are we going to do when we walk out of this place? And are we really going to remain passionate? And are we going to drive that passion into the roots of the organization, which are our staff? And those people that are someday, hopefully, in a succession plan, going to fill your seat. And so I hope that you have enjoyed this webinar, and I hope that you will look us up on our website. And if you're interested in any of the services that we provide, please feel free to reach out to me or to Mary or to any one of our staff as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. And Kirk, the baton is now back to you with your racing analogy.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Bonnie. I'm so enthused about working with O2, and I hope you all will give them a real opportunity to work with you, because they said something that matters so much to Park Street Partners, and that is that let me touch on the two things we provide, and then I'll swing back to this point that I think is primary that Bonnie raised. Park Street Partners stands for Plan, Attract, Retain, and Compensate. So our business is providing supplemental executive retirement programs for credit unions, and we've been doing it the longest in the industry. Our original plans date back to the first plans put in place for split dollars. There are two types of SERPs that are available, 457Fs and split dollars. Our split dollars were the original designs that came in, and we have hundreds of accounts, hundreds of credit unions that partner with us. And we have created the retirement plans for that executive team. We also just recently announced that we have started a new division called PARC Compensation. And that company provides compensation analysis for credit unions across credit union compensation across the board, particularly specializing in executive compensation. And so those two pieces together allow us to have a particular understanding of the compensation market and the executive benefit market for credit unions. But what I wanted to highlight in what Bonnie said, and I believe it's true of our company, is that we are made up of a team that is deeply understands credit unions. And I second Bonnie's point that in order to understand how to set up, in our case, compensation structures and retirement structures, you have to understand the strategy of a credit union. You have to understand how the finance works, and you have to understand how the marketplace is changing, because these are strategic tools. They're not uh, ubiquitous. They're not broad-based. They are designed for your credit union, for your growth, for your financial environment and budget, and particularly around the individual talent you have and who you want to retain and how you want to compensate them. So understanding credit unions is really the important part. Finding the right tools is secondary. And that's what we do at Park Street Partners.
Wonderful. Very nice. Okay, so we're now at the point where we have a few really good questions, and also audience, feel free to place other questions in the chat or the Q&A box that's here. Bonnie, the first question we have for this Q&A is for you. So how do you approach strategic planning when maybe leadership doesn't believe that it's even a worthwhile exercise?
That is a fabulous question because it happens more than you think it would. And I apologize, I'm a little under the weather today, so I'm coughing a lot, and I don't mean to do that in what appears to be everyone's face here. Let me start by saying that at O2, we certainly try to build a very strong relationship with the executive team and with the board, because by doing that, we get the buy-in from the leadership and the most formative stakeholders. Now, if there is a situation where one or more of the executive leadership does not think that it's worthwhile, then we try to start from the ground up and we get involved with the staff, to help them to build their own planning process inside of the organization led by their managers and their directors. And then we meet with the vice presidents and the executive team on a regular basis, usually monthly throughout the year, and to get them very excited about what is exciting the staff. So the various initiatives that they're doing. So looking at the projects that they're trying to accomplish and helping them to align themselves to goals and showing them results, in a structured format, helps the executive team to get very excited. And what I have found, Mary, is that in taking on credit unions who approach the strategic planning conference as a let's check the box, because NCUA is coming next month and we need to make sure that we can show them something. If we organize the agenda and the breakout exercises and the engagement in the conversation appropriately, by the time they come out and they have this workbook, they are so excited about following up with it because it gives them a sense of satisfaction that they now have something that they didn't have before. More of a process, more of a structure, and more of a way to really look at those key performance indicators. And at the end of the milestone periods they set, they then can strive for more. But more importantly, now there's a cohesiveness from the top of the organization all the way to the bottom around what they want to accomplish. I've seen this work many times, and it is so successful, and it's also so heartening, especially when the board sees what the staff is capable of at the middle management level, and at the senior and executive level. So I appreciate that question. And if you're struggling with that call me. I'll give you some insights into that.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, Kirk, I think this next one is for you. Could you comment on the challenge for the board of directors in supervising and incentivizing its sole employee within its policy and strategy role while leaving the CEO to run operations? So the question is, how can we best incentivize and drive results through the CEO with a modern approach?
It is a very good question, and probably at the center of most CEOs' thoughts these days. And there are a couple approaches that we'll take from both. Start off with strategy and then go to compensation. On the strategic approach, I think Bonnie identified the process correctly, which is that a correctly created strategic plan with a governance model that is logical for a cooperative organization, where strategy is set by the board and operations are executed by the team. And that is clarified in the strategy, in the strategic document, and emphasized during the planning session. I've always found has gone a very long way to ensuring that there was a line of demarcation between the strategy and operations. And it is, I think it's an essential question that has to be managed to all the time and does change over time with asset sizes. While the concept remains the same, as the organization gets bigger and more complex, there is more of the operational issues that stay within the exclusivity of the executive team. So I think from a strategy planning session, you can set the tone by creating the right strategy, working that strategy on a consistent basis, not as just a short-term or one-time event, as Bonnie described. And by doing so, the board, there's a very clear line of what the board is thinking about and responsible for, and what the executive team's performance within that plan is. On the compensation level, an equally challenging process, which often is also asset size based. We find that setting a compensation philosophy, getting it approved by the board that identifies the market position that the credit union wants to set its compensation to, the type of executive benefits and benefits that it's going to include, the percentage that it's going to be marked to in the marketplace, 50% of the market for base, 75% for annual incentive or total comp, what the retirement plans would be configured as, having that conversation, using an outside consultant to help build that philosophy and give you the data, and ensuring that you're matched up to the right peers of both the credit union and the banking industry. That data then provides the comfort level to separate the board governance and the executive's governance. And then when that occurs, the board understands that their single employee is the executive, that they have that they're responsible for reviewing and setting up the compensation for that executive, and the philosophy then would be used to manage the compensation for the rest of the team, but that would be at the discretion of the CEO.
Wonderful, great question. Bonnie, one quick one back to you. We've got about 5 minutes left. Is strategic planning something that's affordable for a small credit union?
Absolutely. Absolutely. First of all, when you think about affordability, it has to be considered in the value that you get out of it. I mentioned this, a couple of times throughout my talk today. All strategic planning conferences are not made alike. For credit unions that are small, there are techniques to bring people together for shorter periods of time. There are techniques to use, as I said, group sessions and breakout sessions, and to get various people involved at various stages in the process. And it really depends on who you intend to lead and facilitate the process. One thing I will say is that I have been in organizations where they have conducted their strategic planning sessions led by or facilitated by someone on the executive team. And while that may work in some organizations, I am not a particular fan of that approach because I think that bringing in someone from the outside gives you a fresh outlook. It allows everybody in the room to be heard. It provides a sense of safety and engagement in speaking and asking the right questions. And again, that, accountability factor that I talked about earlier. But yes, every credit union, especially the small ones. I mentioned O2 and said that I follow that practice myself because you have to start somewhere. It is so important to pull your own team together and to talk about what that vision looks like for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, to make sure that you walk away with something that they feel comfortable, that they've got clarity around. And so if you have to make it a smaller initiative, you don't have to go to a fancy resort. You don't have to go, to go even outside of your doors. While that is nice, and it's certainly a perk as you get bigger and you can afford more. But you can have a very nice session that is well constructed, that you have a part in, the board has a part in, and even, some of your managers have a part in, that can be done within your own four walls, and that can be done for a very affordable price. It just depends on what it is that you are trying to accomplish. And especially if you want to start out with having just resurrecting your strategic planning process and starting with a 1-year foundational plan. So, we went through COVID, and for so long, people probably just walked away from strategic planning a bit because it was harder to get everyone together in person and certainly to go anywhere in a group. And now folks are trying to get back. They're trying to come back from that, and they're trying to, find out where we're going and make sure that we've got that plan for what we want to do next. So it's even more important now that we do something. Start small, get back to basics, and make sure that you at least have a conference that brings together your innovators, your thoughts around what you want to be in the next several years, and then, pull together some agendas that are going to really dive into the things that matter most to you and to your membership. Because if nothing else, you can address the things about the membership that you know, and more importantly, that you don't know, so that you can gather that data for the next time and make each session a more productive one.
Wonderful. And Kirk, the last one's for you. We've got about a minute here. What trends are you seeing with or in regards to who is filling the CEO slot?
Yep, Mary, and I can answer that pretty quickly. It is amazing the change that's happening. We, in my generation of leadership, almost everyone came from the CFO seat. Sometimes you saw chief operating officers, but it was predominantly CFOs. As the organizations have become larger and more diverse in their products, in their strategies and markets that they serve, you're seeing now a significant number of chief lending officers, chief marketing officers, some legal and risk officers, CIOs in a handful of places. So it's really becoming more about who has the strategic vision and who can communicate that vision effectively, and then who has is effective at putting a team around that then supports their skills and requirements and builds out the organization. But it's truly about who is the best leader versus a particular skill. And that's why you're seeing a much more diverse selection of people becoming CEOs.
Wonderful. Everyone, thank you again for giving us an hour of your time this afternoon. We have so appreciated the great questions. And please reach out to us if you have anything else, and be on the lookout for the presentation. And thank you all again for coming. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.